The farm lay deep in the Bavarian countryside, miles from the nearest village, shrouded in the soft gray mists of early spring. The air was sharp with the lingering chill of winter, though the sun had begun to promise warmth in fleeting, golden bursts across the rolling fields. On the narrow, winding dirt road that led to the property, travelers would pass without noticing the small, weathered farmhouse, tucked behind a thicket of trees whose branches clawed the sky like skeletal hands. To the outside world, it seemed tranquil, almost picturesque, but those who lived there knew better. The Gruber family had farmed this land for generations. Andreas, the patriarch, was a stoic man in his early 60s, his face etched with lines carved by years of toil, frost, and grief. He moved with the deliberate care of someone who had learned that haste was a dangerous companion on a farm where the animals and the land demanded constant vigilance. His wife, Maria, was a frail woman, quieter than her husband, but with a sharp, watchful gaze that missed nothing. Their daughter, Victoria, was in her early 20s, a ghostly presence in the house, tending to chores and the occasional errand in the nearby village. Then there were the children of Andreas's deceased son, Clara, age 9, and Joseph, age 7, who lived with their grandparents after their parents had perished in a carriage accident years before. The farmhouse itself was a structure of contradictions. Its timbers creaked as though breathing, the roof sagged slightly under the weight of snow from the past winter, and the windows reflected the sun's light in unsettling ways, sometimes glimmering like eyes watching from within. Inside, the air carried the mingled scents of earth, livestock, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of stored apples. Rooms were small and tightly packed, each corner shadowed and easily overlooked. It was the kind of house where whispers seemed to linger, where a slight sound, footsteps on a wooden floor, the moan of the wind through a shutter, could set the nerves on edge. Life on the farm was solitary. The nearest neighbors were over a mile away, and in the winter months, the family sometimes went days without seeing anyone outside. News from the village arrived sporadically, delivered by visitors or the rare traveler passing through. The isolation had its advantages. The family ruled over their small domain, free from the meddling of outsiders, but it carried dangers too. The remoteness meant that help was always distant, and the silence of the surrounding fields could be oppressive. It began with small, unsettling occurrences. Tools that had been left in the barn overnight were found moved by morning. The livestock, usually docile, grew restless, their eyes darting toward the darkened edges of the farm as if sensing some unseen presence. On cold mornings, Andreas would find footprints in the fresh snow leading from the edge of the woods to the house. Footprints too small or too oddly shaped to belong to any of the family members, but none leading away again. He tried to dismiss it as an animal wandering too close, but the prints were human-like, with toes pressed clearly into the frost. Maria noticed other things, subtle and unnerving. At night, she would hear faint noises from the attic, scraping, shuffling, the soft creak of someone walking. At first, she thought it might be the wind catching the roof beams, but the sounds had a rhythm to them, a deliberate pacing that suggested conscious movement. Victoria refused to stay in the main bedroom at night, claiming that shadows lurked along the walls, and that sometimes, when she awoke, she could hear whispers just at the edge of comprehension. When asked who was speaking, she would shake her head, eyes wide with a fear she could not name. Andreas grew increasingly tense. He was a man of practicality, of toil and labor, and such superstition grated against him. But even he could not ignore the strangeness that had begun to envelop the farm. One evening, he discovered the back door unlocked. He swore he had bolted it himself, and the key had been kept on a nail inside. The thought that someone had entered the house, unseen, unannounced, troubled him, though he had no evidence to confront. He began sleeping with the shotgun at his side, the cold steel a small comfort against the creeping unease. Visitors were rare, but when they did come, they noticed the odd atmosphere immediately. A traveling salesman, once invited inside, remarked to the villagers that the farm seemed alive with shadows, and that the family's eyes carried a kind of watchfulness that was almost animal in its intensity. He could not have known that he was almost prophetic, The farmhouse itself seemed to hold a memory of violence, an echo of some distant, lingering threat that none of the family could yet define. The unease reached its peak over a series of days in late March. Each morning brought new anomalies. Milk churns overturned, beds disheveled as though someone had been lying in them, cupboards left open. The children, usually playful and spirited, grew silent and withdrawn, whispering to one another in tones heavy with fear. Even the dogs, normally loyal and alert, began to growl and bark at invisible intruders, their hackles raised, teeth bared at empty corners. On a day when the wind carried snow and sleet across the fields, Andreas attempted to make sense of it all. He followed the footprints again, this time armed and determined, tracing them from the edge of the woods to the barn, and finally to the back of the house. There they stopped abruptly. He circled the building, the echoes of his boots sounding too loud in the heavy, oppressive air. Nothing. No one. Only the wind, the trees, and the faint sense that they were being watched. Victoria spoke up that evening, her voice trembling. "Grandfather, the man, he comes at night. I can hear him talking to the walls." Andreas frowned, trying to reassure her. But he could not. Even the rational part of his mind, honed by years of labor and solitude, could not dismiss the terror in her eyes. Maria attempted to soothe her daughter, but the fear had taken root. The farmhouse itself seemed to pulse with a presence, an uninvited guest that ignored locks and doors. The villagers began to notice the family's increasing isolation. Letters went unanswered. Errands were left incomplete. Rumors whispered along the roads that the Gruber farm was cursed, that some dark force had taken up residence there. But Andreas dismissed such talk. He had faced blizzards, livestock disease, and financial ruin. What was a superstition compared to real hardship? Yet, even he could not shake the feeling that the farm was no longer entirely his own. Then came the night when the unease turned to palpable dread. It was a moonless night, the sky an endless black, and the wind cut through the trees like a blade. The animals in the barn were restless, their cries echoing across the fields. Andreas sat by the stove, polishing the shotgun, listening to the silence, when a sound made him freeze, a faint, deliberate tapping from the attic above. He waited, holding his breath. The sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow, methodical, impossible to ignore. "Maria," he whispered, voice tight, "someone is up there." Maria's face paled. It's nothing," she said, but her voice betrayed her fear. Victoria clutched her grandmother's hand, silent now, wide-eyed. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and twist, reaching toward the family with silent intent. Andreas rose, shotgun in hand, and climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Each step creaked under his weight, and he could hear the wind outside howl through the trees, masking the subtle noises above. The attic was empty. Dust motes floated in the dim lamplight, and the old wood beams groaned. No intruder, no explanation. Yet the tapping had come from here. He was certain of it. That night, sleep evaded the family. In whispered tones, they discussed what could be happening. Every creak, every draft, every whisper of the wind was a potential threat. By morning, the farmhouse seemed suffocating, the very walls pressing in. And yet, the family remained. There was work to do, animals to tend, and a stubborn refusal to leave their ancestral home. And so life continued, each day marked by growing paranoia and dread. The signs were everywhere, though subtle, the displaced tools, the strange footprints, the noises in the night. The family was acutely aware, though they could not speak openly about it, that something, someone, was watching, waiting. And in the deepest shadows of the farmhouse and the surrounding woods, a presence lingered, patient and cold, biding its time. The Gruber farm had become a theater of suspense, a place where every shadow whispered secrets and every sound carried a hidden meaning. The family could not yet know the horror that would come, that would turn their home into a tomb. But the air was already thick with anticipation, the calm before a storm that would leave no soul untouched. And so the days passed, each one heavier than the last, the Gruber family caught in the tightening grip of fear and uncertainty. The farm, once a place of work and modest prosperity, had begun to breathe with its own dark rhythm. a rhythm that promised terror in ways no one could imagine. The shadows were lengthening, and the night that would change everything was drawing closer. The evening descended over the Gruber farm like a thick, suffocating blanket. The last of the day's light had drained from the sky, leaving a vast, impenetrable darkness that swallowed the fields and forests surrounding the farmhouse. The wind carried a sharp, metallic bite, rustling the skeletal branches of the trees and sweeping through the farmyard with mournful moans. Inside, the family busied themselves with chores, the comforting routines of milking cows, feeding the pigs, and stoking the wood stove clashing with a gnawing unease that had taken root in the household over the past weeks. Andreas moved with the precision of a man trained to survive. He checked the doors, ensuring each latch held firm, and placed the heavy shotgun within reach, its polished barrel reflecting the dim lamplight. His movements were deliberate, careful, almost ritualistic, as if by performing these routines he could stave off the shadows he felt pressing closer with each passing day. Maria worked in the kitchen, hands trembling slightly as she prepared a simple supper. Victoria helped her, her small face pale in the lantern light, her eyes darting to the windows whenever a branch scratched against the pane. The children, Clara and Joseph, sat huddled on a bench, whispering softly to one another. They had grown accustomed to fear, their innocence corroded by the constant tension in the house. They spoke of noises in the attic, of footsteps that crept across the floor at night, of whispers that came from the walls. Andreas had tried to soothe them, though his own heart beat with a fear he would not admit. By nightfall, the family gathered around the small, flickering stove. The fire cast long, shifting shadows that danced across the walls, stretching into corners where the light barely reached. Each shadow seemed alive, reaching, writhing. The wind outside had grown stronger, howling through the trees like some restless spirit, rattling the shutters and shaking the doors. The family listened, straining to hear over the storm, over the wind, over the low moans of the livestock in the barn. It began with a sound, a subtle, almost imperceptible scraping from the attic. At first, it was easy to dismiss, perhaps a loose board shifting, the wind catching the roof beams. But the sound repeated, slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Each beat distinct, deliberate. Victoria stiffened, her hand gripping Maria's arm. The children froze, eyes wide. Andreas rose, every muscle taut, and went to investigate, shotgun in hand. The stairs creaked beneath him, each step a reminder of the frailty of the world around him. The attic door loomed above, heavy and shadowed. He reached out, hand trembling slightly, and pushed it open. Dust rose in the faint lantern light, motes swirling like tiny specters. The room was empty. Only the shadows lingered, stretching across the beams and floorboards, mocking him with their silent presence. He closed the door slowly, returning to the others. "Nothing," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's just the wind." But even as he spoke, the family felt the oppressive presence grow stronger, pressing in from the corners, curling around them like smoke. The night deepened. Andreas checked the barn again, making sure the animals were secure. He noticed something odd. The gate, which he had latched earlier, was slightly ajar. Footprints led from the edge of the woods to the barn, small and irregular, stopping abruptly at the door. None led back again. His mind raced, trying to explain the impossible, but rational thought faltered beneath the weight of fear. Back in the house, Maria prepared the children for bed, but sleep was impossible. Every creak, every groan of the timber, every whisper of wind through the trees sounded like a warning, a threat. Victoria clutched her grandmother's hand, whispering about the man in the shadows she had glimpsed earlier, a fleeting figure at the edge of her vision. Andreas said nothing, though a cold sweat ran down his spine. He could feel it, the presence watching, waiting, patient. The first violent strike came quietly, almost imperceptibly. A shadow moved across the hallway, so fast that Andreas barely saw it. A scream split the air, a child's scream, followed by the sickening sound of impact, the thud of a body hitting the floor. The family erupted in chaos. Maria clutched the children. Andreas raised a shotgun, shouting into the darkness, But there was no response, no figure to confront. Only the shadows, now alive with menace, danced along the walls. The attack was merciless and unrelenting. One by one, the family was struck. The air was filled with terror. The frantic cries of children, the desperate pleas of a mother, the guttural shouts of a man fighting against an unseen enemy. The assailant, or assailants, moved with eerie precision, their knowledge of the farmhouse uncanny. Doors were barred, yet breached. Rooms were locked, yet entered. Each strike came suddenly, violently, leaving no time for defense, no chance for escape. Andreas tried to fight back, swinging the shotgun like a club, striking blindly into the darkness. But the house itself seemed to conspire against him. Shadows obscured movement, the wind masked sounds, the night absorbed every cry. He realized, with a cold clarity, that the terror was not merely outside. It was inside, intimate, personal, knowing. Whoever or whatever this was had been waiting, watching, learning. By the time the night reached its deepest hour, the farmhouse was silent. The wind still howled outside, the trees scratching against the walls, but the sounds of struggle had ceased. Inside, the house smelled of iron and smoke, of fear and blood. The family lay where they had fallen, their lives extinguished in a night of incomprehensible horror. The shadows lingered, as if savoring the silence, curling around the empty spaces, stretching long into the corners where no light could reach. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, delicate flakes drifting down onto the fields, blanketing the footprints, erasing the evidence of the visitor, or visitors, who had brought death to the Gruber farm. The forest absorbed the scene, indifferent and vast, hiding its secrets beneath the white veil. The world outside the farm continued, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded in the darkness. Morning arrived slowly, gray and heavy. The village noticed the absence of the Gruber family. Days passed without word. Concern turned to suspicion, and eventually, a search party was formed. The approach to the farm was cautious, each member tense with a sense of unease they could not explain. When the farmhouse came into view, the signs were already apparent. The door slightly ajar, the snow around the entrance disturbed, an unnatural stillness that pressed down upon the searchers. Inside, the horror revealed itself fully. The family lay where they had fallen, the violence of the previous night stark and incomprehensible. Every room carried the stench of death, every corner a tableau of terror. There was no sign of struggle beyond the initial strikes, no indication of robbery or motive beyond the raw, inexplicable savagery. The footprints in the snow outside matched none of the searchers' own, and none led away from the house. It was as if the night itself had swallowed the perpetrator, leaving nothing but the echoes of screams and the finality of death. The villagers whispered of curses, of ghosts, of ancient grudges buried in the soil of the land. Yet, even as speculation spread, the truth remained elusive. Who had done this? Why had they chosen the Gruber family? And most chilling of all, was the presence that had stalked the farm truly human, or something older, darker, lurking at the edge of comprehension? In the farmhouse, the shadows remained. The wind still moaned through the broken shutters. The trees still scratched at the walls, and the snow drifted silently over the fields, hiding the footprints that might have offered answers. The Gruber farm, once a place of labor and family, had become a monument to terror, a dark echo of a night when evil had walked freely among the living, leaving behind only silence and fear. The villagers came and went, authorities investigated, yet the questions lingered. The house stood empty, but it was not silent. Those who approached swore they could hear faint creaks, whispers in the wind, footsteps in the snow. And in the attic, some claimed, the shadows lingered, waiting for the next family foolish enough to call the farmhouse home. The night of terror had passed, but its imprint endured, etched into the landscape, the farmhouse, and the minds of those who heard the tale. The Gruber family was gone, swallowed by darkness, and the world outside carried on, ignorant of the horrors that had unfolded in the shadows. And somewhere, in the folds of the night, the presence remained, silent, patient, eternal. The first rays of spring sun filtered weakly through the clouds, touching the Bavarian fields with a pale, trembling light. To the villagers who approached the Gruber farm that morning, it seemed impossibly quiet. Birds did not sing, the wind did not carry its usual life, and the snow, now melting into the thawing soil, revealed no sign of life. The air was heavy with something unspoken, a feeling that pressed upon the chest like a hand. It began as worry, then shifted to dread. Days had passed without word from the Grubers. Normally industrious and reliable, they had not sent anyone to the village, had not purchased supplies, and the smoke from the chimney no longer rose into the sky. The neighbors, uneasy, organized a small party to check on the family. Their horses trotted nervously along the road, ears flicking to the silent trees, shadows of their riders stretching long in the morning sun. When they reached the farmhouse, the unease intensified. The back door was ajar, moving slightly in the breeze, though no human hand had opened it. The snow outside was disrupted, flattened in places, but the tracks were inconsistent, small, and jagged. They led to the house and disappeared, leaving an uncanny impression of something, or someone, vanishing into thin air. Inside, the farmhouse was eerily still. Dust floated in the sunlight, settling on the cold, worn furniture. A faint smell lingered in the air. Iron, smoke, and something more subtle, something the villagers could not name but recognized instinctively as wrong. The first room they entered revealed the horror. Andreas, Maria, Victoria, Clara, and Joseph lay as if frozen mid-movement. The evidence of violence was immediate. The walls, the floors, the chairs, the stove, all bore witness to a night of unimaginable terror. Screams could have been heard, but there were none. Only silence. A silence so absolute that it felt alive, wrapping around the intruders as they moved from room to room. Each glance revealed the brutality, signs of struggle that were almost theatrical in their precision, faces frozen in expressions of fear, horror, disbelief. The children's small hands were still clenched, as if holding on to life itself, even as it was wrenched away. The investigation began immediately, bringing law enforcement from the nearby town. Authorities were baffled. No signs of forced entry were found. The doors had been locked from inside, yet somehow breached. No footprints led away. No weapon was ever recovered. The small, human-like tracks in the snow stopped at the threshold, as if the assailant had been swallowed by the night itself. The family's neighbors whispered of curses, of long-held grudges buried in the soil, of eyes that watched from the woods. The farmhouse, once a place of labor and modest prosperity, had become a theater of unresolved terror. Days turned into weeks. The villagers returned to their routines, but the shadow of the Gruber farm lingered. Farmers refused to pass by the fields at night. Children were warned not to venture near the edges of the woods. Travelers who accidentally came too close spoke of strange noises, of eyes peering from broken windows, of footsteps that matched none of their own. The story of the Gruber family, whispered in hushed tones, became legend, a dark tale to caution the curious or the foolish. Yet the investigators pressed on, following every lead, questioning every neighbor, examining every corner of the farmhouse and surrounding land. They discovered details that only deepened the mystery. In the days before the murders, Andreas had spoken of the strange footprints leading to the house, of tools and items that moved of their own accord, of noises in the attic that defied explanation. Victoria had insisted she saw a man in the shadows, someone who watched from the edges of vision and whispered in tones too low to comprehend. Maria had noted subtle signs that someone, or something, was present on the farm, perhaps for days, waiting. Despite these accounts, authorities found no evidence of a conventional motive. There was no robbery, no jealousy, no personal vendetta that could explain the calculated savagery of the killings. The farmhouse, isolated and quiet, was the perfect stage for something extraordinary, something beyond rational explanation. Some investigators speculated, had the killer been a local, someone familiar with the family's habits? But all local suspects were eventually cleared. Others wondered if the family's remoteness had drawn a wanderer of cruel inclinations, a figure who had observed and waited. Yet even this explanation faltered, unable to account for the footprints that led only to the house, or the eerie sense that the perpetrator had disappeared as if swallowed by the night. The story of the Gruber farm spread, reaching beyond the village, captivating towns and authorities alike. Newspapers carried reports of the grisly scene, of the inexplicable footprints, of whispers in the attic. Each retelling added layers of horror, emphasizing the isolation, the mystery, the psychological torment. People speculated endlessly. Was it a local man, an escaped criminal, a wandering psychopath, or something older, something inhuman, lurking at the edges of consciousness, feeding on fear, waiting for the right moment to strike? Even decades later, the farmhouse inspired unease. Researchers, journalists, and thrill seekers visited the site, finding the land itself strangely oppressive. Some reported faint, unidentifiable sounds, a scraping in the attic, footsteps across the snow, voices carried faintly on the wind. Others claimed glimpses of figures at the edge of the forest, watching silently, vanishing when approached. Shadows lingered in corners, lingering just beyond the eye's clarity, refusing to obey logic or reason. The psychological impact extended beyond the physical location. Villagers reported nightmares for years afterward, dreams haunted by the Gruber family, the farmhouse, the footsteps in the snow. Children grew up fearing the woods. Parents warned against the allure of curiosity. And through it all, one question remained. What had truly happened that night? Who, or what, had stalked the Gruber farm, leaving destruction and silence in its wake? Some accounts suggested an intimate knowledge of the family's habits, a patient study of their routines. Others hinted at a supernatural presence, an intelligence beyond human comprehension, lingering in the shadows, feeding on fear. Victoria's early sightings, once dismissed as childish imagination, were reconsidered in hindsight. Could a child have sensed something adults could not? Could the whispers, the taps, the shadows have been real manifestations of an entity too patient to reveal itself fully until that night? The farmhouse, abandoned and decaying, stood as a monument to unanswered questions. Windows were broken, doors sagging on their hinges, yet the presence within seemed undiminished. Travelers spoke of inexplicable chills, of feelings of being watched, of small, human-like footprints that appeared near the edges of the yard and vanished again. Some said the land itself remembered, that the soil carried the weight of the tragedy, that echoes of the Gruber family's terror still lingered in the frost, the mud, and the shadows of the trees. As the decades passed, historians documented the case, psychologists speculated on the mind of the killer, folklorists preserved the story in the pantheon of unsolved mysteries. Yet the core truth, the immediacy, the horror, the terror of that night, remained unreachable. No trial, no confession, no rational explanation could pierce the veil of uncertainty. The Gruber farm had become a paradox, a place rooted in reality, yet defying rational explanation, a house of ordinary timbers and extraordinary evil. And somewhere, perhaps still hidden among the trees or watching from the shadows of the ruins, the presence lingered. It had claimed its victims, left no trace of itself, and waited, patient and cold, for the world to forget, and perhaps, one day, to return. The Gruber family's lives were extinguished, their story recorded in horror and whispered legend. But the question that haunted every visitor, investigator, and storyteller remained. Had the evil truly left, or was it still there, waiting, watching, alive in the shadows that no light could reach? Even today, when the wind moves through the skeletal trees and the snow drifts silently across the empty fields, a faint tapping can be heard from the attic. Some claim it is the wind. Others claim it is the footsteps of the past, echoing eternally. And a few, who dare to linger, swear they see eyes in the dark, patient, watchful, and unblinking, reminding the world that the shadows of the Gruber farm never truly fade.